It's 4 PM and all Finance Committee meeting to order. It's 16th today. Thank you all for being here. I'll go through a roll call and get on with the agenda. George Savage, I'm the chair. I'm here.
Here.
Ken Levine,
Here.
Chris Rittler,
Here.
Michelle Takai,
Here?
Bill Urban,
Here.
Mark Wacer.
Here.
Great, and let's see, Chris Rittler will be acting as secretary today. So number 2 on the agenda, does anyone have any communications for items not on the? See if I see any hands on. Not seeing, okay? Okay. Let's see. Okay, so let's see, summertime has hit, I think. So approval of the minutes, our last meeting was after the minute attached. And were sent out to everyone. So do I have a motion?
I have a
Yeah.
Okay.
change.
Maybe. it's-
We have, I think we got backwards the $25 million charitable fund. The first 4% goes to the town, not the investor. And the investors get everything. They get the original 25 million and they all, anything over 4%.
And where is this in the middle?
Oh,
Page 5, page 5.
Page
And
5.
on that same paragraph, it's worded that it's all, there's a charitable fund and then it's the town council had approved such a fund. I believe they approved a separate Portola Valley Fund, which is supposed to collect charitable contributions. I believe it's 2 separate.
yeah, and
Issues.
I agree with your interpretation.
Yeah, there's the PV fund, but then they also approved internal fund for us to add for community donation.
Oh, yeah, but.
Yeah,
they
that
didn't-
was when the donation policy authorization to create a fund in our chart of accounts so that we can receive funds directly.
Right, but this, we would never receive.
Yeah, the community, well,
The 25 million.
yeah, that's
yeah.
Right, and our minutes
unless,
indicate.
unless they coordinate PV fund, which is organization from the town.
Right, so I read the minutes on the 25, on the
Mhm.
Portola Valley Fund, and it doesn't refer to the $25 million possibility.
Right.
And
'cause
that's
it's
not been approved,
ability.
that's still a concept, not a
Yeah, it's
reality.
a concept. Yeah.
To correct the minutes, though, based on what was discussed, not actually has happened since this meeting, how should this be corrected?
I think that we can make it easy. Simply say that the $25 million charitable fund where the town
Mhm.
receives the first 4% and the investors all additional.
Accruing to the investors. So I'll just flip those.
Yeah,
And then like,
and then
Separately.
eliminate
or
the thing with,
with
what
Craig,
Craig Taylor told us.
or,
Great, I will strike that sentence. The edited and revised minute we discussed fund where the town receives the first 4% return with all additional any accruing.
I agree.
Is that right? Okay, fine. I will make this edit. With this edit, do I have a motion to approve this?
I so move.
I'll second.
Okay, in favor?
aye.
Okay, the minutes are approved with an edit, and I will edit this and reattach it to next month's packet so that everyone can. That'll be good. Thank you very much for your lights on that. Announcements and presentations. I don't believe we have any. So but we already went past that. We already approved the minutes. Okay, new business. We will move to item A, which is finance and
Thank you, George. Unfortunately, I did not complete finance update for May in time for this meeting. We just finished posting May revenue this afternoon. We had a slight issue with our EnerGov, which is our community development platform. We had new folks working on it and some procedural or process issues that didn't happen. Corrected it, tried to get it done by Friday, but unfortunately we couldn't do it. In regards to the audits, I will to discuss closing up the 21-22 and then looking at 22-23 and 23-24. As it stands right now, I just want to get through them. And if that means we have modified opinions instead of opinions, and we will correct as we go along so that we're going to have an unmodified opinion. But I just want to wrap them up and get through it. So we'll be having that conversation with the auditor next Monday. Well, depending on the it could be next month or it could be August. So, yeah, depending on what they need still from us. No, that's all I have. Share the screen here. I'm gonna give you the presentation I gave to council last preliminary budget. And also just a quick look at fiscal forecast based on our numbers.
Hey, Tony, this was already,
Yes.
okay.
So we're projecting to have a 2.1 million reserve by the end of 24-25. So that'll be our beginning reserve for 25-26. And with the council adopting the minimum fund balance policy of 20%, this number is above that 20% threshold.
Did they approve?
Yes.
Oh, okay,
Yes.
that's news.
So looking at the preliminary, and this is general fund. Looking at 2.1 million beginning, projecting revenue of 7.95 million. Operating expenses of 7.9. And transfers out of 140,000. Projecting a deficit of 140K, but based on conversations and direction at this meeting, that deficit is going to go up to about 210,000. Part of the reason why is we deferred the town manager's salary for 1 month because an offer has been made to candidate, but we're not anticipating this person to start until August. So I deferred 1 month of town manager salary. And then the other item was the planning and building director. That position is vacant. And I had deferred 6 months because it was some time to recruit for this. Some members of council felt that too conservative, that the position will probably be filled before then. I don't know, but they wanted me to relook or revisit that. So I've added 2 months of salary into the budget for the planning and building director, and also added an additional 40,000 for consultants or contractors for in planning and building and town engineering. I had not put all of their costs into the budget, so those costs have increased. The 7.95 is going to be about 8.05 or 8.1 million for projected general fund expenses. But the projected ending reserve will be about 1.7, 1.8.
Tony, with regard to increase because at a time of hiring both the new town manager as well as prospectively new director of planning, building, what, isn't that largely an offset to what the contractor role is? I thought the contractor, the interim positions were largely equivalent in cost to what the permanent is.
No, the interims are hired, the interim is a retired annuity. That person's not receiving PERS, is not receiving any medical benefits, dental, vision. So it's just salary, Medicare and Social Security. So there is a significant offset. So, the town manager, it's just a month of not paying whenever that person comes on board. So general fund, we're looking at 15.5 full-time equivalents. And as I said, contractors to augment staff building. And then this is the last year of the credit that we received for the sheriff contract. And that credit was actually from the county administrative officer, not the sheriff's department. So, and obviously this chart is based on the numbers that I had before council discussion. But yeah, the deficit of almost about another 80,000 on top of that. With this budget, there's still going to be a constraint on services. Counter hours will remain the same. There's going to be continued delays in permit and plan check processing and building inspection. Continued delays in website updates, PRA requests, and recruitment, retention, and development will be challenging, and continued reliance on consultants and contractors for the foreseeable future. Impacts on future budgets, reduced customer service expectations. We still do not have staff redundancy. There's still going to be ongoing challenges related to clients. Continued reliance on consultants and contractors. We have limited staffing resources. The sheriff contract, just with the credit expire next year, that's 211,000. And then with some increases built in or it's in the sheriff contract for 26, 27. Limited capital improvement plan investment. We're having increased maintenance costs for facilities, vehicles, continuing issues with IT, and we're going to be limiting investments at here if we support it. And then looking at our current revenue and expense trends, we're going to need to identify an additional 2.1 million cuts between in fiscal year 29-30 to maintain the 20% minimum fund balance reserve. So looking at
Is the 2.1 million in cuts, is that in aggregate over multiple years or?
that's an aggregate, so it's 400,000 and 600,000. And
Okay, yeah, thank you.
so the fiscal forecast I'm about to show you, assumptions, property tax is going to grow at 4%. All other taxes are going to be growing at 3%. User fees grow at 3% and with no new revenue measures. On the expense side, salaries grow at 3%. Benefits grow at 7%. Supplies and services will grow at 3%. And contracts will grow at 3%. And capital investments are limited at 300,000.
Yeah.
So this is the model. And if you look at the chart, the red line is expenses. The green line is revenue. The blue line is the policy reserve. And the black line is reserve. And then the gold line is fiscal year. So current trends, without any revenue measures, we're going to have to find cuts. Like, as I said, between 26, 27 through 29, 30, just to get back up to the reserve policy of 20%, which is going to be around 2 million.
And to be clear, that, these cuts would be, necessary even with the already reduced service level, right? We're not.
Right.
Yeah.
This is to avoid structural deficit. I mean, we're looking at a structural deficit. Avoid it, but it's going to be predominantly cuts to staff and then any limited, any consultants, contractors, got those as well. But it's, you know, it's going to be draconian.
What do you think the shortfall would be if we were to have adequate and all the rest of the items that you described before?
We adequate redundancy, that would limit use of the consultants, but it's still going to be the sheriff's contract that, and that growth is just going to, unless we renegotiate, reduce services and then there's also Woodside Fire. The budget does include a 20-day reduction in vegetation management for 25-26, but that would be another area to, the Woodside Fire, said they were gonna pick up the fuel engineer costs for 2 years. So we got a little help there. But you know, the rest is with consultants, we had adequate redundancy, we'd still be laying people off too. But the dollar amounts would be roughly the same.
Okay.
And Tony, challenges to regulatory compliance with the budget, particularly for this perhaps going into the bit of the subsequent. How confident are you that you and your team will be able to get us caught up on audit schedule? What we just went over in the minutes at the beginning of the
Right.
meeting.
There's no option on the audits. It's just something that we're gonna have to do, but it's the other reporting requirement. There's gas tax. We fell behind 3 or 4 years on that. We have to get that one up. There's the financial transactions report that we're a little bit behind on that one, but then there's other.
Yeah.
I think that's Rita.
Rita, if you can, your microphone occasionally, input from an open mic.
So yeah, but it's the other departments as well. They have the appliances that will be impacted as well.
Tony, can you clarify? I'm looking at the line. I think I have the same one you have on the, that you're showing on the screen. There's it looks like duplicate, data points for the fiscal year ending 25. I see it listed as a 4th and 5th.
Yes, that was the proposed budget,
The first one was the proposed budget?
and then the second one was the revi.
Okay, so another, all right. So basically, if we want a continuous graph, we would push the data back. We would just look at the second bullet one.
The second 24, 20.
The actual
Yeah.
one.
You mentioned consultants, or at least in your write-up, consultants for polling.
Mhm.
What are you basing that on, and what potential?
So that consultant, I believe it's 30, and that's going to be for polling and for messaging. And that was approved by council.
Okay.
So that's going to start up immediately upon the placement of the new town manager. And also the current interim town manager has agreed to stay on for a few months to kind of help with the transition with the new town manager.
And depending on the path we undertake for revenue, there could be additional costs captured here. Is that-
There could be, yes, but we'll be identifying those as.
Thanks.
I'm sorry, so you mentioned that the current budget does not include any expenses to raise revenue?
just the consultant for the polling.
So that, I think, did I read somewhere 70,000?
Oh, yeah, it's 70,000. It was 30 for the polling and 40 for the, or vice versa.
So that's in the budget.
That's in the budget, yes.
And how about legal expense? For any of this is gonna be,
Well, that's going to be included in. But if there is costs associated, I mean, again, we'd have to go back to council for. And we can't do that because we'll be doing mid-year budget, a mid-year budget adjustment, in February.
but can't we expect now there to be some minimum amount of
I,
additional work?
I will say there is going to be additional costs, but I can't tell you how much it's going.
So we're not budgeting it? That seems like
What number would I put in? This is something that I can put back in when we do the get more information. Because right now we only have polling and what the results of the polling are going to be is going to determine what measures we're going to pursue. And then that's going to build the, what the other consultant's going to be doing messaging. If there's going to be any additional costs related to charter town amendment, I believe we can get a bunch of volunteers down to help that charter amendment. And then a lot of the other items could be staff built into the staff costs. But, we're going to do what we can to limit any external costs going forward. But I'm not going to say there aren't going to be any. I just don't have a number to put in the budget now, but I will have probably in 6 months.
And since we have these numbers of 30 and 40,000 for the polling, have we made a contract with a provider of these services?
Yes, that was approved by council.
And can you tell us who that is?
Godby, I believe. Godby, and then I think her last name's Lou, but they've worked with multiple cities in the area. The interim town manager, Mark Linder, he's worked with these. I did work with one of these firms in Scotts Valley for this. So they're well-known, respected throughout the area.
You know if it's the same one that Los Altos Hill?
I do not know the specifics, but I mean, I can look into that.
Thank you.
So moving on, if we were to adopt a charter town, and based on historical numbers, our current transfer tax rate is 55 cents per 1,000 in sale value. Currently, we average about 107,000 in transfer tax revenue. However, since 2010, we've averaged 53 homes per year. And the average sales price since 2010 is 3.9 million. And it's been significantly higher over a couple of years. So if we were to adopt a $5 per one, we would generate an estimated 1.04 in the first full year. And if the measure is improved in November 2026, the rate will be effective January 1st, 2027. So based on these numbers, we would look at $500,000 in transfer tax revenue from January through June of 2027. This requires a 50+1 majority vote to pass. And there are two ballot questions. The first question would be, should we adopt the charter measure amendment? And then should we set the transfer tax rate at $5 per? And $5 is just an example to get to 1 million. But if you look at the chart, revenues increase significantly. And the reserve does increase significantly. And with that, we can start investing in people. We can start investing in our facilities, our maintenance. And also if we wanted to build up an amount to pay down our liability, our PERS liability, we can do so moving forward with this measure.
Just to proactively address a possible difference in assumptions, in the very last page of the packet, the subcommittee comprised of Chris, George, and myself. There was a chart there with regard to the charter town with this real estate tax. We use $5. It's six, and the difference is that we assume 40 sales per year as opposed to 50 something, and we just use the average of the past 3 years. It's
Mhm.
very similar, but it's
Mhm.
just if there is a discrepancy, we
Right.
look at that versus the last chart. Yep.
Yeah, it's a great point for the table on the back, the numbers here. Subcommittees.
Right, and just to throw out a third one, when Michelle and I did the analysis, we used Paula Cohn's numbers, and we said that $6 per thousand would bring,
Right. Correct. And $5 is not the recommend. It was just for the model. So looking at the parcel tax, basically parcel tax, a flat tax assessed on parcels. The town has 1,760 taxable. The others are exempt. Either they're owned by the town or they're owned by other governmental agencies, or they're exempt from taxation. This will require a 2/3 majority vote to pass, 50% plus one if it's a citizens initiative. So a $720 parcel tax would generate at 52,000. And again, the estimate assumes 25% of the parcels are exempt. And looking at the model, again, reserves would go up. Revenue would increase expenses. But then this would also allow us to start making some additional investments in our people, and also addressing some of our maintenance issues. And, but with the parcel tax as opposed to the transfer tax, the parcel tax is flat. It's going to be the same dollar amount year after year, whereas the transfer tax is going to fluctuate based on market value as opposed to the Prop 13 2% cap. So just wanted to make sure that was pointed out.
Just to clarify, with a parcel tax, do you have to have a time limit?
You can set it up with a time limit. You could also include an oversight committee, saying that these funds will be audited and separate financial reporting requirements. It can be however you want to set it up.
So there's, I mean, I guess ones we tend to get our first bonds or something
Yeah.
have a fix, but we wouldn't necessarily have to have a fix, a time limit with a parcel tax?
I mean, you can or you can't. I mean,
Okay,
I
all
mean,
right, it's not a
there's
requirement.
there's
Okay.
been sales tax measures I've been a part of where this, like, I think some of the transportation tax measures. So, but I mean, it's however you want to phrase it or however you want to set it up. You can, no term limits. It's completely wide open.
And the only wrinkle I have on this is my own research on the parcel tax was interesting in that it indicated that the approval threshold could be 50% even without a citizen initiative as a general tax. The rest of the research specified that nobody uses it.
Right.
So
Yeah, it's rare for a general parcel tax.
yeah, so I'm not arguing in favor. I thought that was an general parcel tax because they're flat. They're usually probably, perhaps, I don't know, they're dedicated to a fund going to supplement a school, something particular, rather than as a general revenue measure. But I'm no attorney, so I don't know for sure. It's just a question if we were to ever consider if it were a general fund tax, whether
Right. And another option is the town itself could set itself up as district. And with that, the town would then have the power to, if they wanted to do a bond measure to say address a complete street or sewer drains, storm drains, they have the power to levy bonds. They can do parcel tax, but it's all within a community facilities district. And like I said, that's just another option.
Another observation about the number of taxable properties. I think you mentioned a total number of 1,700.
Mhm.
Some odd number of properties and maybe about 25%. That to me because I'm familiar with what the school numbers are and which encompasses some people who don't live in Portola Valley, but they have a similar exemption number, but that's because seniors
Mhm.
exempt from it as well. If we're talking about a parcel tax that's not being used in schools, seniors in some ways don't, benefit as well from. An argument could be made that might have more than.
That's possible. Yeah.
It'd be quite a bit lower exemption number of properties. We might have
Mhm.
properties available. That would actually make a pretty big difference.
Correct.
And if we're talking about something that's not being used,
Mhm.
seniors necessarily shouldn't be exempt
Right.
from that.
Bill, that's a good point. So again, back to that last chart. Zero exemption. So that's why the numbers are slightly different as opposed to 25%. We assume for that very point.
If there are any exempt parcels, do they get a vote?
Well, we're looking at town-owned parcels that are not taxable. There's also parcels owned by utilities or other governmental agencies. Those, they would not be assessed a parcel tax because they're,
My question is different. If there are, say, senior, do they get a vote on the parcel tax exempt from it?
if they have a parcel, yes.
Yes.
Which is again why likely the consultants would have seen, otherwise they're gonna vote against it.
Let me see.
Well, there are some where it's the property owner or the parcel owner. They may not necessarily be. So, I mean, there's a whole,
Yeah, when we get in later to annexation and everything, that flows
Yeah.
with property owners.
so the other revenue item that was discussed was UUT reallocation. And this would reallocate a portion to the general fund due to legal challenges. Only the telephone and energy could be considered. Water UUT would trigger a Prop 218 challenge. There are legal challenges in the courts right now in regards to water. So the town attorney was pretty consistent saying, don't even think about touching the water, just with all of the legal challenges that are going on throughout the state. And again, this is a 50+1 to repeal, and then also be 50+1 to reallocate because it would be going from a special purpose tax to a general tax. So, and again, there would be two measures, one to repeal and the other, or excuse me, two questions, one to repeal, the second question would be with the restrictions to water, this would generate an additional 340 and would not necessarily help us in the long term in regards to additional revenue in relation to the anticipated cost increases. So this could be something that we can do in it too. Any other revenue tax measure or something not to be considered at all.
Yeah, and this recent research was surprising for me because people with longer tenure on the committee recall that for many years, we were laboring under the impression that UUT
Mhm.
voting threshold, and indeed it is in Portola Valley to the extent that we're open space fund dedicated portion of tax because that's a special tax.
Right.
Whereas the general fund portion is a general tax, so that
Mhm.
I hadn't realized
Yeah,
that.
and I know in the packet that you also looked at adding like cable or as a new UUT, like, and that would be a general tax.
Mhm.
If you want to assess the 5.5%. If you wanted to do the full then it could be collapsed into this conversation as well. But again, that's something that we're going to need to flesh out and work on over the next fiscal year, just to come up with what we're going to put on the ballot, if we're going to put anything on the ballot in November of.
So to clarify, the 347K is if the two.
That's it. No, we're reallocating the 2%. It goes to the open space to the general fund. And
Right,
it's
so it's
just
so-
for, but it'll still be seven. It'll
Right,
still be seven
But
and a half
the open
percent.
space fund gets nothing.
The open space fund would lose its water, would telephone and,
It keeps its water.
but keeps water.
And,
And also the interest funds, which
right.
used to be not much, but now it equals what they were. Getting.
Yeah, I was gonna ask that. Have we considered that the open space get reallocated? Is that,
It's
that would require also a vote?
well, now you're going into the accounting rules. It's, the funds generate the revenue, even though it's part of a pool. The interest gets reallocated to its portion of revenue throughout the fund. So yeah, so any interest earned is allocated by percentage of cash
Got it.
balance.
So that would be, call it 400,000 a year.
Well-
If, I'm
well,
not saying this,
No, we can't reallocate the interest.
you can or can't,
Cannot.
even with a vote.
No, I can't.
Yeah, you can't, I believe,
Interest is not,
can't be reality. California
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
state law, it has to be allocated in court.
And that's sort of where the thought experiment, given interest rates are higher now, could the open space fund would continue to grow as it had. So it arguably would no longer need the two UUT.
sorry about that.
And I think, Tony, I have to go back to my note. Adding internet to this, from the research that I did, it's easy.
Mhm.
If you're opening up this portion of the city code,
Mhm.
it's easy to add internet. And I think that was worth about 100K.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
So it's significant on this.
Right, but I did not include
Right,
in.
right. So that's
Yeah.
why I'm noting it.
Yeah. But even still, even if it's an addition, still not going to the anticipated increases in costs. If this is,
Yeah,
if this is
look,
the
I-
only,
Yeah,
the only revenue measure,
yeah, this is,
Yeah.
as a standalone doesn't.
Right.
I agree, but it definitely
Mhm.
would reduce some of the other.
Right.
Requirements.
Mhm.
So I hate to say this, but in our house, we split bills, and so I don't see a lot of it, but I do see our direct TV.
Mhm.
And there are taxes in there, but it's never been identified as Portola Valley UUT, so I think they're federal taxes.
we
Is there-
do receive some UUT from DirecTV.
Okay, maybe it's
And
buried under
Zoom.
taxes. It could be just, it's.
Yeah, it
it's
could be something
labeled-
that's triggering it. Yeah.
It's not, whereas I think on the
Right.
PG&E bill, it's Portola Valley
Right.
UUT.
Right.
Yeah.
You
when
really
we-
know you're paying it.
When we looked at it previously, looks different. They don't say some don't even say, some just.
It
say
just says
local
taxes.
tax, Some say taxes.
Right.
Taxes. on
Taxes and
top.
surcharges. Yeah.
But Tony shared what we receive in payments, and you can see the flow and kind of back into, okay, that's got to be that chart. Okay. Yeah.
Right. But yeah, you should have PG&E and then you should also have it on your. And then, we do receive a lot of little remittance gas company. And they range from 40 cents to a couple of thousand, but I mean, it's a number but I like what the nexus is exactly sure, because it's companies I've never heard of. And, but, if they want to send us the money every month, I'm more than happy to receive it. But plus the other thing about UUT, the other item and is updating our telephone, UUT ordinance because the language is, very antiquated, ancient. Yeah, hasn't been touched since the 80s.
I think I may have asked this question a couple of years ago. But the franchise fees that the town collects from the various utilities that hold these franchises, are those, are those negotiable fees or are they set by some kind of?
I believe the only one that's negotiable waste bill, like cable is capped by DIVCA. And then there's some acts, so it's like limiting to 1% to 2% for water and PG&E. But the cable one is capped at 5% because that's due to DIVCA, which was a federal mandate. But yeah, the only one that is negotiable is
It is
Yep.
for the others.
the other ones are not. They're set by legislation.
You consider that a productive area? Not, I mean, we don't want to lose our utility service.
Right, yeah.
But-
Yeah, the other one, yeah, to change PG&E or of legislation. And that's not worth going down that road. The one with green waste is if there's any significant cost increases, they'll come to us and say, hey, we need to renegotiate. And that's something that council could set in relation to the contract. And I'm not exactly sure where we are in the contract, 3 years or 5 years.
I guess it's obvious to everyone. For the record, UUT is a tax that every citizen pays on services. This is not something that gets allocated to us by these service providers. It gets tacked onto our bill
It gets tacked onto your bill,
and
yes.
we pay it.
Yes.
So anything we do to UUT is just money out of citizen pockets. It
Correct.
is a tax.
Yes.
It's not a subsidy from a service provider.
And it's a
I've heard
tax.
people be confused.
Yeah, and it's a tax that every city has on their
Yes.
books.
They do.
And
And
it's
Citizens pay that,
it's basically set it and forget it.
so everybody pays their.
So that was my presentation to council.
So could I ask, the exhibit 5C, which is called revenue options here?
Yes.
Is that is that part of your report or is that our report?
That's finance committee.
And are we,
Hey, Somebody's
now is,
needs to mute.
Yeah, Leslie, your microphone is online. Leslie, can you mute, please?
yeah.
Thank you. Why don't I see if there are any public discussion here on the budget? Public comments on what you've heard from Tony and the panel so far? Okay, I
Hi,
don't see any. Oh, wait.
yeah, I'm just
Is that Rita?
driving. Yes, and
Yep.
I'm driving, so I
Oh, okay.
don't
Yeah,
wanna- don't want to
well,
compound my future by also putting my hand up. But
no, don't do that. Let's hear
just-
your comment.
just a question. I guess this question is really, it could be for the town council, but we were told that before the new town manager was going to be approved, that there was going to be some kind of meet and greet on the final candidates. So I'm really surprised to hear that an offer has been put out and we're looking at how the money's going to be distributed and whatnot concerning that candidate. So it's just a little disappointing with the hiring of town manager the last time. So thank you for listening to my frustration, but I'm sure I'm not the only person. But thank you, Tony, for what you're doing. And I know you're going on vacation soon. I don't know how that's going to impact what we're trying to do with the audits, rush them up. But thank you for rushing them up because I feel uncomfortable of us figuring out how much more money we can get from the residents when we don't know how much money we had because the audits and the financials have not been really done since 2020. And I know you weren't here, but we have received lots of promises on when things were going to get done. And I tell you, I can share a whole bunch of emails with deadlines in it saying things were going to get done or clarified from many years before you. And, we'd really like to have that done before there's a vote on how that we are paying for, figuring out how the residents can spend more money. So please, do what you can. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rita. The only comment I'll, for everyone in the public, Craig Taylor is our town council liaison. He was unable to be here. You won't be hearing from him tonight. Let's see, I see Betsy, you have your hand up.
Yes, thanks so much. I have one question related to the budget, and that was, I didn't hear a moment for questions, and so I'm going backwards a bit. Tony, did you take into account the Nexus fee study that we initially began about a year or so ago? I believe it was tabled. I think that it was tabled because of the change in the staff at the town level, but I'm not even confident about that. And whether is that forecast to be completed? Because as I remember at the time, we were not fully reimbursed for the costs, planning and building costs. So that's question one. Just related to the recent conversation, the attractiveness of a simple majority is obvious. And as regards to the parcel tax in particular, are we considering the extra level of effort and interest to float a citizens initiative? Or is that considered by most towns to be too onerous? Thank you very much.
Thanks, Betsy.
So to answer question one, yes, the fee study does have an impact on revenues for next year. It's about an $80,000 increase. We're looking to wrap up the fee study for September. And then also there's going to be, if based on the results of the Nexus study, there'll be development impact fees. If those are implemented, then the development impact fees could then be some of the capital improvement costs, particularly with our streets, if we have, or with our facilities. The second item is with the parcel tax. If it's a citizens and town is not involved whatsoever. So this is, there is no cost associated or borne by the town, other than if it does make it on the ballot. Whatever the cost for the ballot for 26 or for November 26, those are going to be split between all the towns that have ballot measures for that particular vote. So it'll be, for example, the last election, our total cost for ballot measure was $12,000. Whereas if we did a special election, it would have been 125. So since it's every 2 years, a lot more cities and towns put ballot measures, which does reduce the cost significantly for the ballot measure. That would be the only cost associated if it's a citizens initiative, because the town cannot be involved whatsoever.
Thanks so much. May I take this time also to a separate point? We're getting a lot of audio dropout today for whatever reason. Hopefully it's a one-off thing, but if it happens again, just to be aware, our town AV issues continue to plague us. Thank you.
And
And
I'd
thanks
like
for
to
your-
add that the schoolhouse for the budget, so, and will actually be a project set up through the PV fund.
Yeah, I don't see anyone else with their hand up, so let's go back to discuss committee on the budget issue.
So Tony, are you going to go through the numbers in the packet, which compared last year to this? Oh, or
I wasn't planning on it
can I
unless
ask-
there was a question.
can I ask some questions? So when you show FY 24-25, that was the budgeted amount. It's not some actual.
Yeah, that's the revised budget amount.
Okay, so I have, can I ask questions then on
Sure.
And again, it comes, I hate to, I know I said something last time, but the sales tax,
Yes, so the sales tax was overstated for three,
well, again, that's because
our sales tax
Zots was,
is coming in less than what was budgeted.
right, and Zots was
Well, I-
closed.
Right, but I've adjusted that downward based on what the projections are coming in from HDL, which is our consultants who review and analyze this.
Yeah, but did they know Zots was closed for the,
Of course, they knew Zots was closed.
okay, and hopefully they're not gonna be closed. It just seems, no, I can believe that our actual is less than last year's budget because they were closed,
Mhm.
and I'm sure we didn't,
Right.
and, but unless they're closed again this coming year, you would think we'd be above
Well,
Act-
we're
we
we're
would
not
think-
even close to 3 for this year.
actual.
Yeah,
Well, again, they were closed though, this year. They were closed like maybe up to 2 months this year, this fiscal year.
for 24, 25 or
yes.
23, 20.
24, 25, I believe. Yeah, I think it was last fall.
Okay, then there must be some other factors that are causing a decrease in sales tax other than just
Zots.
Rosati's.
Okay, they, you know, when you drive
But
by them.
they just said that they're in the town. So any significant bump in their activity does have a significant impact
Right.
on our revenue.
And especially when they're closed for a couple months. They were only, this is just based on driving by there. They were
Mhm.
a couple months.
Mhm. Right, but that's all factored into the analysis.
Oh, well, okay. I have a separate question on the interest.
Yes.
So we're projecting an increase of 25,000 from 145 to 170.
Yes.
And is that?
That's just for the general funds allocation.
Right.
But we are anticipating higher interests than, because I budgeted 800,000 total for 24, 25. We're almost at 1 million at the end of May. So interest earnings have been very good
Well-
despite all the volatility.
I'm sorry. So,
So higher interest earn, higher allocation to all the
right,
funds.
right. But in theory, interest rates are supposed to come down. In theory.
Are they?
Well,
Where do you think interest rates are going to be next year?
well, I'm just saying, I don't think they're going up.
Yeah, but that's the question I have to ask next year. And, I haven't seen anything that says they're going to cut,
Not, well,
because they'll say they're going to cut, but then so they hold off on the cut. So, it's,
I'm sorry, so the 25,000 increase, it's just like keeping it, constant?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah, it's all based on a projection.
well, yeah.
It could become 6 months from now, they've taken a whole 100 basis points off. And I'm gonna have to reset the interest for the budget update.
So just to clarify, so the reality is the vast majority of the funds are invested at something close to the, the money
Yeah,
market
the yield
rate,
rate,
which has
yeah.
been kind of stuck at about
Mhm.
4.1, 4.2 about 9 months. That the reason it's been stuck there is because the Fed has, hasn't continued to
Right.
drop interest rates. And that money market account will always track within days whenever the Fed makes a move.
Mhm.
Try to project the interest rate. The question you want to ask is, what is the Fed going to do? It's basically the same question. There are some other investments in
Mhm.
money market, but they're not they're earning interest at about the same rate.
Right.
Money market. That's the difficulty we had. If we knew where the Fed was going.
Right.
I don't know if anyone thinks the Fed's going to increase rates. but I don't know anyone who's
The wave
convinced
up.
they're gonna
You can
cut
do
them
it.
either. So that's as good a assumption as there is,
Right.
just to go with what we've seen for the last 6 months.
Right. And we can, I mean, if we do see where the rates are going to drop, we do have the flexibility to, we can reallocate, to our other investments or,
Water bottles.
The other point to be
What's
made
wrong?
is because we do
I
have
there's one in your hand.
we have some funds that
Thanks.
Darcy,
if interest rates drop, the money market funds will drop as well. But
Right.
the other investments will, or interest rates won't go up, but there will be a slight capital gain in
Right.
which Tony is lumping in with interest. So we actually have some things
Mhm.
that among the holdings that'll tend to even out the interest rate changes.
So I'm looking at page 2 of the packet where $8 million of income and taxes and just over $8 million, 8.1 million expenses. I think that for the purposes of this meeting, there's really nothing within our control that we can do on the revenue side. I think the only question for this, to provide a perspective of what the committee's viewpoint is on the upcoming fiscal year, is really whether we would recommend moving a budget deficit, right now shown here is about 100 budget deficit, but modification that the town council suggested or recommended or made is that it actually increases up to a 210,000 deficit spending. So I think the fundamental question for the committee is, would we as a committee recommend to the town council to accept a deficit of about $210,000? Or would we recommend something else, perhaps a balanced budget? I think that's that's the way I view it, is really that's the question in terms of why we have it today in advance of when the town council next meet, which will be to approve the budget for the upcoming fiscal.
Tony, am I correct though? Didn't deficit come from the town council?
Yes, the additional 80,000 came from direction from the council. And it was at specifically salary and benefit. But I also want to add that strategy of burning salaries, the true cost that the town needs.
So my question for Tony will be, if we did deficit spending, how quickly would we drop below the established 20 general fund reserve minimum?
Well, even with the projected deficit for next year, we'll still be above 20. But then 27 or 26, 27, if we continue, we would probably fall below in that year.
So in other words, if guidance from here was it's okay to deficit spend in the coming year, that will not push us, in your view, under all these other assumptions, below 20%.
No.
For this year.
No.
So we bought a 12 months of grace period, kind of figure out how to manage this thing.
Yep.
Okay.
So when I ran, so right now we're about 26% at 2.1 million. We're about 26% of the reserve. If we do 210,000 deficit spending, it'll move it down to 20.
In progress.
Yeah, my own sense on all this, I would be comfortable with doing that. We clearly have a structural problem here. And my hobby horse, you've all heard before. 1 year, 60% increase in the sheriff's safety contract, and then escalating from there is at the heart of the matter for us, and some kind of structural fix. We have cut back on services. We could have a balanced budget this year at the cost of even more problematic. Trying to remodel their house, for example, or do other things where I'm hearing complaints I also serve on the Westridge Architectural Supervising Committee, and, you know, people complain that they've been working with the town and their response rates are slow, et cetera, and that's the inevitable wages of understaffing and et cetera. So we have to find a way to address the structural.
Right, and it's also turnover, staff turnover.
Yeah.
I mean, it's,
Right. Yeah, and so.
it is a real problem.
Yeah, and so we'll get into this on the next topic, but, you know, there's no point having a town.
Right.
It's there to deliver.
My own perspective on this is that pretty adamant about having a balanced budget. I think in this particular case, given that it's only that adjective, but in the whole scheme of things, I would be, of course, I have sympathy for people going through the building process. I think in terms of the finance committee and its focus, given the fact that we are so desperately late on historical audits and the town staff is maybe stretched, I actually think it would be prudent to forward with a deficit budget that, as the town council directed, because it really doesn't stress, doesn't put it down below the reserve policy. And I think it would be not a good, it would actually, to squeeze it to get to a balanced budget, I actually think that there might be unintended negative consequences on whether you have to people, there's unexpected things. So I actually, I find myself a little surprised that actually would be recommending a deficit budget for just this particular year to give it another year to see if we can get caught up, particularly.
Yeah, I agree with that analysis. Don't believe anyone in California taxed, but I don't otherwise here. Other comments, other opinions?
My view is that the consensus of the committee and accepted by the town council was that 20% was the number, and therefore 20% of 8 million is reserved. So we could spend up to $500,000 deficit and still be very happy, because now my recommendation was should be higher, but nonetheless, to stay consistent, I see nothing wrong with a $200,000 to $300,000 deficit.
Well, and as we've already said, there's a lot of guessing or estimates, so to me, it seems premature to get overly concerned at this point. Maybe in February we'll be more concerned. But given how uncertain a lot of these numbers, whatever we've presented is fine with me.
Just from a point of process, town council expecting a recommendation?
No.
No?
No, I mean, other than I say that they've reviewed and.
Yeah.
You know, they've,
Okay, so we don't need a formal resolution.
no formal resolution, just be in the report that the finance committee did review.
Yeah.
And Mark approved a deficit.
So, well, I would just go back, I mean, recommend for adoption the town's annual budget and its annual financial statements. That's kind of it. That is our charter. Our charter is to recommend a budget.
Would you like to make a motion?
I'll make that motion. I can't believe I'm recommending a deficit. Doing it. I
And it's
can't.
on the record.
And it's on the record. This is on.
Probably not, because it's the summer meeting. Do I have a second for that?
So I'll second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the Finance and Audit Committee has fulfilled the responsibility in our charter, and we unanimously recommended adoption of the budget with the very modest deficit as proposed by Tony and modified at the last council meeting consideration.
if it makes you feel better, Mark, this may be the last year that you vote this way. Right?
But you don't want more taxes.
Well, let me,
And I don't want,
there you go. It sounds like our family. All right. So with that, let's move on to the next. Revenue options here, in the printout, it says subcommittee. Oh, that got truncated. Apologies for that for everyone. Just a bit of background. All know, but from like, the committee established a subcommittee, Mark and Chris and myself, to look over once again, primarily the work that had already been done by subcommittees in the past on revenue options, various structural options for the town. And the impetus was that at our last meeting, interim town manager Mark Linder requested us to do that and try to create a summary document that you see before you now of pros and cons on the various options, effectively just summarizing a bit of new information. I'll share with you the work product at a high level here in subcommittee members, and then we open it to the public, and then the whole committee can discuss the output of this. I'll start with it because I took the format and the first draft that Mark did and then recirculated it, so it'd be unfair to have him and others try to read my interpretations here. But the idea, again, was to have a menu thought of with pros and cons, not direct recommendations here that will perhaps emerge from this conversation here about ways to meet our structural deficit. Many of you have already heard some of the topics because some of the budget, but there are 9 options here. Few minutes, and then we can hear from the public and then discuss. The first is status quo, and it's that anything. I don't think this is realistic, and subcommittee, but we can all discuss that. But I'll personal opinion here. But that if you look at the comments, our sheriff's costs are unlikely to stay stable. They have pressure on their salaries and fringe benefits like everybody else. And so they're going to continue to charge us more. And that is certainly going to put us into more of a structural deficit. We've all seen Tony's projections for the future of where to go without change in economic outlook for the town, which is unlikely to occur organically. The way property taxes are capped and the way town has very offsetting commercial activity. We think about the parcel tax. We already talked about this a bit. Have our own assumptions, and pretty much we wind up in the same place that Tony. We discussed the 2/3 majority vote, which is typical for special use taxes, but a majority for a general tax, et cetera. But not really sure about the supermajority kind of concept. Number 3 is one that's of particular interest. Charter city. Being a charter city conveys a number of benefits in terms of giving the town council flexibility in a number of dimensions in terms of setting policy, one of which is go to the voters for a real estate transfer tax. We talked about that. This is very interesting because it could yield significant revenue. As Tony mentioned, that revenue would grow with the sales price of homes. Simple majority vote. The revenue could fluctuate with the real estate market, of course. So if there's a few people sell their homes, there would be less revenue, but that would work in reverse as well. One thing that worthy of consideration is that most residents are affected in a year, but of course, when you sell your property at the end of your time in Portola Valley, or when you, then the tax catches up with you and you pay a lot of it.
Don't forget, it could be split, or
Yes,
a savvy seller who lives here may want to put that in their con.
Yeah, you can negotiate it. And it is deductible coming out of the selling price. It's not part of the taxable basis home, the profit. And so you're not limited by those current SALT deduction limitations, et cetera. So there are benefits there, but it is nevertheless a burden on those engaging in real estate. Sugarcoat that, but generally speaking, if had your real estate appreciate, it probably is less problematic and well emphasized. It could be a negotiated thing. You're splitting it with, say, a buyer who hopefully had an IPO or something. So then we get into some other structural issues that were asked to consider. One is to annex the Ladera commercial area, and this would enlarge the boundaries of Portola Valley to include more commercial businesses, get more tax revenue, both from property tax and sales tax there. And we made estimates of modest amount of revenue here. We're hoping to get numbers from LAFCO, which is the local agency formation. We benefited from a very long meeting with Rob Bartoli, who's executive director there for the county. He generously spent a lot of time with us going through these issues and all the arcana of how you put things together, communities together, or split them apart in a state like California with all the complex law regulations we have. And he was a wealth of information. He's trying to get us some actual figures and gotten them yet. So we have some estimates, and the revenue here is potentially pretty modest. Our estimate is $2,000. The majority of the property owners affected, though, have to be voting in favor of this. And here the key rub for both this and in more of Ladera or other areas, or combining with Woodside, they all share the political issue, building consensus around identity, and also what's the value proposition. We have a revenue need, they don't, and what sort of additional services are compelling over and above have. And so it gets a little thorny in that respect, but we talk that over a bit more. Same kind of thing applies, as I mentioned, to side and urging. And again, the LAFCO has a very process of a board comprised of leaders from throughout the county, and they would have to be involved in that sort of process. We also were asked to consider unincorporating, and here the idea is, well, we'd cease to be a town. So we wouldn't have a town council. I guess we wouldn't have a finance committee, but we would continue to live here. It would be valley, and this would, of course, get us out of having to pay extra money to the sheriff's office to take care of county residents who are already paying property tax to San Mateo County for the sheriff's office. As PV residents, we already do before our municipality send. This is complicated. This is a LAFCO process. Well, Rob shared with us that the state views it very much as a last resort because people have a lot of identity wrapped up in their town. He also shared something which really I took note of, which is this was last successfully done in 1972 in the state of California. So that's something to think about, is the practicality. Then, of course, in terms of our RENA allocations for housing and all the other problems we face, it's not that all our problems go away. It's just that the people larger level of the county of San Mateo, where many people at the other county may have never even visited our part of the world. And so you'd have to worry about whether we're trading one set of problems, but it's an option for us to consider. Number 8 is a wrinkle on this. We incorporate from a recreational space and do other things, but it's a very similar kind of process. And then finally, something that we can Tony, which is modifying the user tax. I won't at length here, but this is another potential approach. So with that, by way of summary, questions for me, discussion on the option? Would love to hear from people what you all think.
I just want to update in regards to the housing element. We are substantially compliant with the state. So we've crossed that bridge. And, you know, in regards to the housing element, the mandate is not to build, it's just make the town in a place that someone can build.
And by, with their change of direction, accepting our proposal, did we make material changes to the proposal or did they?
We swapped Ford Field for, and we still have other alternative sites that can be named as well. And so, you know, we're on the track of, you know, we're not going to have a decertified housing element. We're not going to be subject to builder's remedy. So, you know, we're on the right track there.
And Tony, my recollection, I did listen to the town council alternate site here, Christchurch and
Christchurch and across,
and
across Town Square, yeah.
Hey, Tony, how did that impact the budget as you were developing it?
It did not impact, there's still some post-adoption that we have to take care of, and that's in the budget. But that was an additional 100,000, but 40,000 of that's coming out of the. So.
Okay, thanks.
So, George, I have a question. My recollection is, we were asked to present the pros and cons, and I think you even, but this seems to be a very, well-organized description. And I don't see pros and cons.
Okay, yeah. Category, saying pros and cons, but I think the pros would be reflected in the description. So, impact the enactment standard and then or caveats, if you would. I mean, the pros is the revenue, right? And then ease of enactment, and then fairness considerations as against some of the comments. But you're right, there's not just simple pros and cons. Trying to fit it on one page.
And on that point, because actually I think George did an excellent job of taking my original base work, actually making it very clear and on one page. I really kudos to George for that. I did hear Craig Taylor ask that last meeting. I also did listen to the town council where there was a difference. I perceived that there was a difference of the finance committee. Specifically, Craig Taylor described it as he did with us. Rebecca Flynn, I heard, really was wanting more recommendations. So originally, and when I originally drafted it, I avoided the pros and cons because that seemed to me a very personal perspective, which perhaps we could then talk about as a committee, but I thought that it was unlikely that we would be able to get to a consensus on what are the. And that also struck me that was really veering more side of policy elected officials could be evaluating. So I found it to be impractical to put a column that says, this is my perception of the pros, and the con that says, this is my perception of the con. Because then if I did that, then it would be filled with 7 people. And I thought that would create a very complicated, messy process. So I actually really like what George forward, which I would is a data and allows the town council to have their own perspective.
Let me add another way to maybe get the pros and cons. I was just making a note here. I think there's 3 major areas where people could say that's a pro or that's a con. First one is how much revenue. More revenue, pro. Less revenue is not less pro or not.
I disagree with that. More revenue is more taxes. I fundamentally agree with that.
Okay, so that could be a pro or a con. But just the dollar amount of revenue, however you look at it. So again, this is just a way of framing the thing we've been asked to do, which is identify pros and cons. The second one, evaluate the pro or con, how easy get this measure done. Some of these things are easier to do relatively, on a ballot measure, maybe you can make it less easy, whatever. So you can evaluate it on that. Yeah, a third category would be the extent to which it would affect some kind of a change in the town's governance going. I would say in general, it would be a pro if it doesn't greatly change the way our town is governed or see ourselves, and be a con if it would be a major just for the town. So I would just suggest that we could go down this list and kind of put each of them into and evaluate them on those three categories. And that's getting about as close as I think this.
There's another one that I think is frankly a bit of an elephant, actually, is what is the purpose of the town? The original town was fundamentally to restrict building. I mean, that's fundamentally the original purpose. What has happened, particularly with the most recent cycle of the housing element, is that I believe it's flipped it on its head, where the town's purpose is actually now created a target for housing as opposed to restriction. It's actually now mandatory. So that would be another view of it. But again, I'm quite certain that the town council is quite familiar with that dynamic, but that would be another, and I found that to be difficult. But I really thought that that's, again, what the town council is going to be very focused. And again, this was not a big deal until the most recent cycle, because it was 53 green allocation, not such a big deal. 256 or whatever it is now, that's a much bigger.
So, last August, when this committee first started looking at these alternatives, we identified 5 or 6 different things to look at. They were all pros and cons type of thing. They were, how does it appeal to voters? Who pays? What are the anticipated revenues? We continue to use that one. Complexity to implement it. The cost and the effort to maintain it, the tax. The duration it would take to get it done. Taking 2 years, which it is going to take. Future flexibility and legal risk overturned at some point. At that last August, I think Menlo Park got a UUT overturned, is my recollection. So there are pros and cons that we've looked at before, or we talked. They're not included in this report that's looking at now. And there are other things such as tax efficiency. Is the tax deductible? There used to be people in this town, I think Ed Wells is the one that comes to mind, who would have been at every meeting. Who felt that taxes were okay only if you could deduct them on your taxes. But clearly a tax which is deductible is better than a tax. Tax equity. Is it a progressive tax or a regressive tax? Fixed revenues versus the growth. A parcel tax is a fixed revenue. A real property transfer tax is one that changes with the change in real estate values, just like property taxes. And whether or not there's an annual tax payment required of every resident, or whether it's not annual. So for those seniors who are on fixed incomes, that becomes an issue. So clearly, a valuation here, we want the greatest revenue possible with the least impact on residents. That's what we're trying to accomplish. And so writing down things which gives the town council some perspective on these value laden, and I agree with Mark, they are different. What's value to him may a curse to me, and vice versa. But at least addressing them and putting them down on paper so people can make the town council, I guess, can make their own decision.
Well, I agree with, the comments that you're making. I'm not sure that having a comprehensive list, many categories, is necessary, given from my eyes, at least option 3, the charter city best meets the criteria you laid out, and others could be done descriptively, given the finite number of options that face in front of us. Allowing the town to enact a tax on the transfer of real estate allows us appropriately and modestly tax other towns. The essential market-based asset we have in our town. We don't have business, have hotels, or significant amounts of sales tax revenue through our dealership, else like that. So transient taxes don't really work. What we have is property, valuable, and in some ways too valuable. So, my family who would like to. So I'm not defending it. I'm just saying that that is the main town that we have. And if we could have a transfer tax that hits the Ed Wells tax efficiency concern, because we're not deducting tax, we're making a lower profit on the sale of our house. And so therefore our tax is due on the sale is, well, that's good. How do you mean?
A lower gain is bad.
No, I get it. I meant the point earlier that it's focused tax, which is bad, and taxes per se. I'm simply saying that if I'm raising X amount of revenue in a way where someone doesn't have to pay tax on that was paid as another tax, that's superior to, say, paying UUT, which I'm paying the tax, but I'm still additional income tax on the income that I earn tax. So that's all.
So is the question on the table that we want to make a modification to this, or are we opening this for what's our recommendation? Right, because we're doing both.
Yeah, that's a great question. We'll get to that. Let me start talking about what we might want to recommend. Anyone online have a comment?
I do.
Whoop,
Sorry.
Somebody.
I'm sorry. I spoke up because I couldn't find the hand raised signal quickly. Am I interrupting another speaker though?
No, you're not, Betsy. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. A couple quick questions referring back to your earlier conversation. Did I understand that you are going to do some kind of a poll of the residents of Portola Valley? Or is this going to be a recommendation between the finance committee and town council? I asked that question. I just did a real quick calculation, and if the average home is worth around 4.2 million, this is throughout the valley, and that might be too low these days. I did this very fast. This would cost the seller $25,000, which is a fairly considerable amount, particularly for residents that are moving into the Sequoias, or something comparable. So it's a pretty big hit for those who are looking at end of life care. I just want to put some kind of facts behind what otherwise I find council members have so much to read that they might not understand the magnitude of what we're talking about. But the real estate agents will, and you'll get a lot of press, I think, if we don't do some of this work ourselves. And so I would like to hear not only your first recommendation, but some backup recommendations in case one of them goes down. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Hi, and this is Rita. I also can't find I just walked in the door, and if somebody else has their hand up, I'll wait till after them.
No, go ahead, Rita.
Yeah. There are 9 different variables here, and really hard work that was put into that. But, I think our goal should be the 10th one that's not mentioned, and that is financial responsibility, to catch up on our things, to see what we actually have, you know, to really be fiscally responsible and get that done as a priority. Like nothing happens until that is done, and then we talk about what else we can do. But that should be number 10. And I know there was the
What-
choice
what-
of
You broke up when you were saying that. Was that the audits you were referring to? What I,
I'm close to the finances for each year, the audits,
Okay,
the other things that are done, just us being financial responsible and get all that stuff done. I know you talked about things as they are, but as they are, it's still that financial priority for so many years. It's just not been satisfied. So
okay,
please,
thank you.
please, number 10 on that, so people know. Thank you.
Number one on my,
It's number one for us.
I would suggest it's actually not a new one. It's the task, I think the task that we assigned ourselves was look at different revenue enhancement opportunities. Tell us what the pros and cons of each of, not, should we even do any revenue enhancement? That's, let's assume for a minute, we were asked just to develop pros and cons for various revenue enhancement approaches without judging whether we had to do any of them, but which is a council could, or, you know, maybe some residents believe they should make, which is,
Yeah, that's right. Have a lower budget.
but that's not what we're asked to do on this
Right.
project, correct?
That's right. And my own rationale is that the various annexation approaches here, even if they're well-intended and would work, they really take years of working through a LAFCO process, building political, both in Portola Valley and in the other affected communities. So that may or may not be something to think about long-term. Doesn't really that we have where in a year, we need to have a plan to doing something differently, or we fall below our reserve level. Unincorporation doesn't seem because it doesn't work in this state, number one. And number two, that's just kicking the can over county supervisors. So I don't know that that would help us in time. Parcel taxes generally aren't used. Taxes and so it sort of comes down to
Recording.
UUT modification, and the charter city, at least for me. And now when I think of UUT modification, I can't modify the water portion because of these recent lawsuits. So that then becomes less rational. And so I wind real estate transfer tax as what's left. Somebody has an open mic online. I think it's.
Yep.
So if we can, yeah, mute. Thank you. Well, that was my thinking. You know, you think that's why, I mean, that would be good, or you agree or disagree. I think that's really what we're here to do.
what I'd like to lean in on. First of all, we have a structural deficit. We know it's going to continue. So I'm a proponent of, as a resident of this town, it's going to cost more to live here to get the services that I expect. And the primary service that is causing the structural deficit is the sheriff. So we all benefit equally from this sheriff. So I am a proponent, and I think from a financial perspective, when you have a structural deficit that is tied to not a special interest, but to a common interest, you should have a revenue solution that addresses the common interest, which is continued police service. So therefore, I'll just say, look, I think anything that addresses that and on this parcel tax is probably the thing that addresses it. Helps contribute to that because all residents are subject to the same cost. I don't think applying a real estate tax to people who are leaving to solve a structural deficit just makes doesn't meet my financial, and I respect that other people, other financial logic. But cost of living in Portola Valley has gone up. Let's face the music and figure out how we pay more that we can collectively. That's my opinion.
Yeah, and just to, I agree with that, and I want to add on to it. I think sometime back we'd had this issue about general tax or special tax. I think we had floated a public safety special tax, which could be embedded in a modified UUT, or it actually could be the subject of a parcel tax. There's a couple different ways you could do that, and a public safety special tax, there's some advantages in terms of the ease of getting it done and so forth. And the fact that it would be called public safety probably goes to the point making it's a shared benefit that we all have. It'd be argued that maybe there shouldn't be special exemptions in more properties off the tax rolls. And we know we're going to have public safety expenses way more we'd bring in from this kind of a special tax anyway. So there's no risk. Kind of the problem we have now with the open space fund is that maybe we don't want to keep funding that anymore. I don't think we're going to have expenses in the public safety area for as long as any of us are alive in this town. So I would say one of the pros of those two, the parcel tax and the UT here, is it can be framed well with yes, a special tax for public safety, which goes that you were just making about how it applies to everybody. That might be a nice way to sell the concept to the community, which maybe is pro, right? If it passes a pro, it might be part of the pro in terms of.
Yeah, but a decided negative would be tactically, it raises the approval threshold from 50% to 6%. By calling it that.
How do we address the fact that a parcel tax is flat? Is there any way, or is it based on something and it fluctuates? Or, because if it's not, I'm not sure how the parcel tax addresses the long-term fiscal. I see it as a temporary kind of one-time plug.
Yeah, you can have an inflation adjuster in it. In fact, the school district tried that about 4 years ago and it failed to pass, and they went back and worked it. Reduced the dollar ask, fixed dollar ask, made it, made it smaller, about 25% smaller, and they took the inflation adjustment piece off, and it passed quite handily. So that can be done.
Because it seems like, looking at this, I think there are three options that have a chance of pass, or of passing is the wrong word, because status quo is one of the three. It's status quo, it's the charter city, and it's unincorporation. I think the annexing, I think, is a non-starter. I can't imagine any of these areas wanting to merge with us. I just don't see it. And I think Georgia is going to take a long time to politic that. I don't think utility tax gets us there. I guess it can be a component solution. But I just don't see a 2/3 vote passing. Parcel taxes, unless there's an inflation adjustment, I just don't see it addressing the problem. So to me, it's status quo, charter, or unincorporation. I know we're not talking about that idea. But my concern is if we go for a 2/3 required vote, it's not going to pass. I'd frankly be surprised. So, we need either a plan that we think is actually going to pass or a fallback that, we can live with.
Wrinkle on the unincorporation idea makes, I mean, one of the reasons why we're here is really fundamental. Particularly open space makes this such a wonderful town. I'd hate to unincorporate and lose that protection. So that this unincorporate and become a special district, specifically a recreational district, which is very similar to special district. They manage their facilities there. Under the California Special District legislation, open recreational districts also can easily manage open space. So that would be something that I think that would enable the heritage of this protecting open space, really foster it. And then it does, I mean, it does actually unincorporate, then actually burden county, which I have a hard time imagining county level allocate a bunch of mandatory housing here in the far-flung reaches of the county. I mean, so it does, I do think that it's not simple unincorporation solves the sheriff issue. I think it also solves the housing element issue, but it preserves that which makes Portola Valley quite a special place to live.
One possibility to have a thought experiment here is one could pair status quo with the sheriff back to the old calculating, or we unincorporate and they lose. I mean, they created a revenue problem for us. We create a revenue problem for them. And so rather than having the revenue from the no longer extant municipality of Portola Valley go to zero, it would go back to where it had been on the growth trajectory it had been on for decades prior to unilateral change in. I mean, you know, and you go to the voters saying, all right, sheriff is bankrupting us. And it was all caused by the current administration redoing how things have always been done. And that has put us in extremis here. And if we're no longer a town, you have to deliver all these services without any of the revenue you bring. Flips who's got the revenue.
George, I like that thought, but it's accurate. They
Okay.
they get the 7% of our property taxes that we. So they basically get right now we're getting 7% back of our property taxes that we all pay.
Right.
At their
Oh, yeah.
county.
So they'll get more.
They get, so,
Yeah.
and they're charging us 5% or 4% police services, so we don't like that. I agree.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem right. But they do get the 7%. They'll have a little extra left over planning. And to the point of why everyone's, Mark, you said people come to Portola Valley for the open space. Zoning was the original reason that the town was formed back in the 60s. And we would lose all the zoning. So I actually personally not opposed to disincorporating. I find it as preferable to a parcel tax, which will surprise those people who think parcel tax is a good idea. But I am sensitive to the concept that we would lose the ability to set zoning standards and be open to whatever the county decides to do. So that's not good. So I am like George. I find after looking at all the possibilities that real property transfer tax makes a lot of sense because one, it increases in value as the property taxes go up, as the property values go up. So it's very much like getting additional property tax revenue, except for its revenue, which it's taxes, which only to us because it's only paid by people in Portola Valley. So that it solves the problem not only for this decade, but next decade as well. Secondly, it's not significant. $6 per thousand is approximately the number that we need. Maybe it's 5, maybe it's 7, but that is 0.6%. And when you sell your property, you have to pay brokers somewhere between 3 and 6%. 3.0 or 6.0. We're talking about a 0.6% delta, which if you split it between the buyer and the seller is 0.3.
Or negotiate a lower commission for your broker.
Exactly. So I don't see it as either a significant cost or an unbearable cost. It's a very small number. So I'm in favor of it.
Let me make a suggestion. He's not here, so he can't repeat what his request was for us to provide the pros and cons. I would be comfortable taking this chart. I think it's pretty complete. I don't know if there's a
Okay.
bit of tweaking you might want to do based on the discussion here. Send this to the council, get maybe 2 or 3 of us from this committee to go to the council meeting the day they want to have a discussion about this. And we can lay out, we can have 1 or 2 different versions of pros and cons, interpreting one chart, and let them talk among themselves and to us back and forth about it. I think this, you come conclusion. I have a
agree.
much greater understanding just in the last half hour from the discussion we had. I don't think you can encapsulate it,
Yeah.
capture the nuance of some of the things we're bringing up. I think that's a much better way to help them develop it. And then they can, they'll have the benefit of us having that same discussion that we just had here in front of them.
Yeah, I support that idea. I agree. Encapsulated with what you just said, my struggle, and I think Mark's struggle, all of our struggle in trying to distill all this down to a simple, columnar list of pros and cons, right? Because there are a lot of different trade-offs to consider here. I mean, I agree with Chris when it comes to fairness, general benefits, general tax pay as you go, but I'm also sensitive to the mechanics of how do you have tax efficient in an era where everyone's deductions are limited, and just how do you get it enacted as well for people who are already overtaxed. I mean, nobody wants taxes, certainly. But we also don't want to go out of business in town, and it's not within the power of our own representatives to control these expenses that are forced on us.
Yeah, I just had one thought in response to Chris's comment about it. It doesn't make sense that the town, you're paying the tax to support the town. And I was on the subcommittee with Ken on that looked at the transfer tax. And it never once said that you could dictate who paid, like, towns are notorious for charging hotel occupancy tax because it's always the visitors that pay the residents.
Right, that's how
I-
it's set up.
I don't know if we can specify. Does anyone know that the buyer pays for the?
Any transaction, the buyer always, all expense,
Wait,
always.
Wait, the seller.
Gets whatever's left. That's regardless of how it's contracted, however it's legislated, buyer pays everything.
Yeah, economically it makes sense. The economics, this is a tax on a real estate transaction, so the burden is falling on the buyer, effectively.
But I don't know if we'd want to, if it's possible to specifically legislate it, to say, and the buyer will pay it.
But it wouldn't matter.
It
That's
doesn't
Mark's
matter.
point. It does
Okay,
not matter.
Economic, yeah.
Money is fungible. It's just the
Okay.
total amount. It's a bit like, with an employer contribution line item, how much. And there's the part you see in your paycheck, and there's the part only the employer sees. still the total cost would otherwise go to you.
It may make passing easier, that's all.
Yeah, I get it, but it's
The
just
voters.
optics. I'm economically being, to people, you know, and Mark's very good at always reminding that these things are a tax and that, you know, making less revenue is bad. Trying to sell something, and thank you for,
All revenues are all taxes are,
yeah, that's true.
So I'd like to get back on the topic of what we're trying to do here. Assuming that this document that you've put together is something that we'll either modify or use, I would like to recommend that under the real property transfer tax, the last sentence and comments be eliminated because I don't think it's accurate, which says something about but significant burden to those engaged in property transactions. Not significant.
Well,
It's a value statement. If
I don't
you-
know. My sense is $25,000 money, and you know, the real estate industry, and at the margin, there will be fewer transactions, but perhaps hard to detect in a valley. I don't know, but it is a drag on transaction. You know, it's focusing the burden, as I think Chris was pointing out earlier, we're all going to benefit from the sheriff, but effectively 40 or per year we'll be paying that bill, and that's a burden. And I'm just acknowledging it. I personally still support it on net, because of all the various positive reasons. Problem.
Well, then if you can't see to take it out, because 0.6% is not a significant number. When you compare it to 4.2 million, I think.
Yeah, but town for whom it's not significant, and there are other people for whom this only main asset that's the only big money they're gonna have to live on for however long. You know what I'm saying? Circumstances differ.
Right, and so public safety also isn't exactly the same for everybody. So the argument that public safety is everybody's concern, well, I claim that if you live, it's more your concern than it is the person who lives in a hovel. And therefore, having a tax that's based upon the value you're getting is more appropriate.
Yeah, I agree. That's a good point.
And that's not pointed out in this.
Okay.
And not everyone here agrees, because comments been made before, which I can also understand, that everyone benefits from public. We all have one life to live. But some of us have more property than others to live it in.
Yeah, that's a good point. So from a bill, Bill, your recommendation, talking to the town council, I think that's a good one. Do we want to modify this document? I mean, he doesn't like the last sentence.
No, I think I agree with what Ken. You can argue over the wording for,
Maybe we could take out the word significant.
well, whatever. I'm not into like these goals, but I think Ken's right that it's a starting point for a discussion. Discuss with the town council.
George, I had sent you, you'd asked for when you were going to prepare this with the subcommittee, and I had sent you a document, which I thought, I don't have the document in front of me, expressed the pros and cons of the real property. Right, but evidently that didn't make it into this.
Well, try to make the relevant points make it in. As I mentioned, I'm very supportive. That's the option that I've got stars on. So we're not disagreeing about the mechanics. Simply about how I condensed comments.
George, let me take another stab at this. How about on this far right-hand column, you can leave the comments there, or maybe adjust them, but then put two other columns, one that says pro and one that says. So we're not saying the pros and cons of the 9 different options together. We're saying for each one, the pros and cons. Here's what we clearly think is a pro of a parcel tax, which we think is a con of a parcel tax. And just list, because everything has pros and cons. We don't have to make a value judgment about how each person views it. The council can clearly see, and they can discuss among themselves, how they want to weight those various pros and cons, come up with one or two of these directions. I mean, that's about as much as we can do for them, right?
Yeah, I would agree with that approach were it not for 1 or 2 pages of paper, because each one of these items would be a pros and cons. Because there's like 19 different dimensions that kind of commented on, which is fine, if we want to go with a bigger sort of booklet with all the pros and cons for each column. I just don't know how you would fit it.
And practically, this committee of 7 will not, I'm highly confident, reconcile on a consensus on the, I think, but frankly, it's more have their own sense. I think that this document, which is good summary, it's data rich, it actually provides a framework to really evaluate options. I mean, Bill, I respect the question. I just don't practical that we do that, before the next town council meeting, which is actually just the
25th.
25th.
Yeah, I don't anticipate part of the budget adoption discussion. I think it's going to be teeing up what's going to be many conversations starting in July. But, just listening to everybody, Maslow's hierarchical needs because you said it right. I mean, I don't see the finance committee coming to a consensus on, some are say this is important, this is. But I can take this and have him kind of look at it and get some feedback. And then we can move forward. I mean, because part of the other conversation is what's going to come out of the polling is also going to determine what's the town's appetite. But I mean, this has been a great conversation.
Yeah, and just to, some comments I think that will be reflected at the town is Peter and others got to get our audits done, and we're working on that. We all agree before we're asking the public for any money. Are there some things, I'll ask the committee here, that rule out as being practical, and that would be the annexation combination sort of approaches. I see it coming down to parcel tax, charter, and real tax, or as practical things to consider. And if we slim it down to that, then yeah, pros and cons would be more.
I would be asked of us by Mark Linder, who was conveying the request by the town responsive to that specific. Secondly, when I read, that meeting that we had with Rob Partoli, absolutely said that annexing is kind of essentially the can of worms, the Pandora. Having read though the LAFCO documents, it's fundamental. The mechanics actually are not so. It's no more difficult than an election. So I would actually, I would suggest keeping them on for those 2 reasons.
I wouldn't, yeah, you misinterpreted me. I wasn't suggesting we talking for the purpose of discussions here. Well, it's clear we all don't agree on, charter city versus a parcel tax versus can we all agree that the annexations are, that these structural changes to the way the town is structured are solved our problem in the time we have remaining, or do we not agree on that? No.
Or just maybe divide it between or
Yeah,
something.
but I'm just saying, just for purposes of are we all on the page that from our perspective, it's center around the parcel, the charter, or versus all these other longer, or is that unfair of me to, that's my,
I would not.
okay,
I just think that look, I think we on this committee have an opinion that charter cities. I don't know. We haven't done it yet. And I did AFCO process, George, you were at the meeting, Mark was at the meeting, that there's quite competent organization there to guide us through a process. That's what the town council wants, right? So, I don't know if it's long-term or short-term, but I think they're viable. I think if the citizenry motivated the town council, any of these options, they could be done.
I would agree with that. It actually includes, I did listen to the last town council to actually engage these two consultants. One is a polling firm and the other is more of a communication firm in anticipation of a possible possible action around election in November. But even though also I'm a bit generally averse, particularly, that this actually strikes me as actually good use of city money is actually to actually go to the citizenry, see what the town actually wants to really help inform the town council in terms of its options. And I would think that the consulting polling firm would actually take this document and then have some useful polling around it.
Yeah, I mean, you can't argue data and getting that polling information to what we need to do.
What's the timing on the polling?
I don't have that information, but it would be, I'd have to get back to you on that one.
And when it comes to the issue of merging with surrounding towns, my view is that I don't know if it's good or bad, but I don't know if we have enough to know whether or not it's just combining two weak teams or a mediocre team and a weak team together, and you still aren't going to be playing for the championship. So I don't know that if we would decide that the combination would make more sense for us than it does now. And therefore, I think it isn't that they're long-term issues here. They're just, we don't have the data. And I'm not even sure it's worth getting. Because it's not going to happen quickly.
yeah, and my concern, haven't even our value proposition for the other party. Certainly, I haven't considered what would be in it for Woodside resident, a Dara resident.
I apologize. I gotta go. Okay.
So what are next?
I really think this is a town council discussion.
Yeah.
And we have data here to share with them. I like some representatives from the finance committee joining in.
Okay, great. Yeah, we
Moving
can,
with that discussion with town council. And then that can lead to whatever gets pulled.
okay, super. So, Tony, you're going to talk to Mark and then we can,
Yeah, I'll present this to Mark.
Yeah,
And
then we can-
Mark will kind of discern whether this is what's needed or if there's any additional information that's needed, but then Mark will also
okay,
the council's agenda.
excellent. All right, so without objection, I'll close out this topic. Any future topics we need to add to the agenda?
When would that be? Meeting be?
Probably next month. Okay.
Do we need? that? I'm from the old school where we met
I know. We used to
3
meet
times a year max.
Yeah, I know, but
I mean, do,
Um,
is there a need to meet?
we got to do audits.
yeah,
Well-
so depending on the outcome of the conversation. That would determine, if we have a meeting in July or not. Because
Short
I
meeting
mean,
for
it's
a-
because, the budget's going to be adopted. I need to take a breath and then we'll be back at it.
I'm just saying, I don't know if we need to discuss in depth.
It can be quick.
Not sure we need a separate meeting just for that.
Well, part of the process is you need to review it before it goes to council. So,
Yep, that's right. So, we'll make allowances for everyone has to have a vacation. Having to meet. Hopefully we will in the future once we get through all of these. So I don't have a date yet.
there's a hand raised.
Okay, David Cardinal, let's hear from you.
Yeah, hi, I apologize for not chirping in except for the feedback when it was open, but I was doing my civic duty as a jury member. Just a quick comment and a question about the whole unincorporated thing. The comment is, I don't think people understand, the same people who want the town center to be open 5 days a week and get quick feedback on permits, that's all going to be done by the county. I mean, the life is going to change. So yeah, hopefully we don't get there. The question is that the sheriff's services are not a light switch. So we are paying, I guess, 2.5 million for one full-time, 24/7, 4.5 FTEs plus whatever. And the idea that just because we tell the county to take that over, there's no guarantee they would provide the same level of service anyway. We're 1/250th of the county, and I don't think they have 250 sheriff's deputies 24/7. So, it's not just we're going to get everything we have now and not pay for it. Now, so my question is, have we asked or found out what the baseline level is if we had them provide it, and whether we would get the same, better, or worse service than we have now? So sorry for being late on that, but I wanted to chip in. Thanks.
Thanks for weighing in, Dave. And that's a good question for us all. All right, so, I think we're done. Unless there's more from today. I think we've done everything we can today. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second? We're adjourned at 6:08. Thank you, everyone.